First released in 2017 by Team Cherry, Hollow Knight is a relatively introverted game, opting not to come out of its shell but rather forcing players to work to uncover its secrets. The locations of Hallownest and the inhabitants and history present within them seldom present themselves to players, preferring instead to hide away in the depths of their kingdom until the night unearths them. While Hollow Knight typically operates under this format of forcing players to find both their path forward and the clues that help to unveil the mystery of Hallownest's great infection, there is one thing that this title does not shy away from presenting to its audience in full glory. That being the game's haunting atmosphere, and understandably so, as the eerily entrancing mood of Hallownest's expansive network of caverns is one of Hollow Knight's most defining features. Yes, the title's simple yet effective combat and movement systems, which come complete with a collection of charms that are capable of providing unique, customized gameplay, are certainly worthy of praise, as are the intriguing characters that roam through Hallownest's largely forgotten regions. In fact, practically every aspect of Hollow Knight is noteworthy in some positive way, but it's the manner in which many of these aspects are woven together that creates the most fascinating and memorable property of Hollow Knight, its atmosphere. Hollow Knight's deep, dangerous locales contribute to the lingering uneasiness present in the game. Its despondent characters and their forlorn history evoke a feeling of regret that attaches itself to players as they explore. And of course, the gameplay itself, which is structured to keep players on their toes at nearly every moment, certainly adds to Hollow Knight's dark nature. Examples of this game's dreadful atmosphere are present everywhere, so let's go over some. As I mentioned, Hollow Knight's soundtrack magnifies the effect that the game's atmosphere has on the player, as do other aspects, but let's first talk about the influencers that can actually be seen. Starting, of course, with the actual visuals of the game. Hollow Knight takes place within Hallownest, a kingdom long ravaged by an infectious plague, with many of its inhabitants deceased or maddeningly sickened by the aforementioned infection. What little architecture the kingdom once upheld was left to deteriorate, creating landscapes that are hard to gaze upon without feeling some sense of sadness for the fallen civilization. Also of note is Hallownest's location. The kingdom is almost entirely submerged beneath the crust of the earth, with only a few small areas managing to breach the surface. Because of this unusual setting, regardless of the time of day, the majority of Hallownest is shrouded in darkness cast by the kingdom's cavernous ceilings. Even the few areas that do rest above the surface are consistently clouded by impenetrable fog. The kingdom not only fell victim to decay at the hands of an infection, but also lies in eternal darkness, giving players almost no opportunities to escape from the apocalyptic environment it houses. Even Greenpath, a largely forested area overcome with life, still displays its gloomy nature, which manifests in the forms of hostile, infected civilians and abandoned infrastructure. Even in this lush expanse, few escaped the infection with their lives, and those who did, such as Un and Nailmaster Shio, took refuge in the most remote depths of Greenpath, resorting to living lives of solitude. The vicious plague, which takes the role of Hollow Knight's inanimate antagonist, spread to every corner of Hallownest just as it did Greenpath. Queen's Gardens was stripped of all but the kingdom's queen and a few adamant turncoat warriors. Fog Canyon, though brighter than many of the kingdom's other locations, is almost entirely devoid of sentient life. Deep Nest, which is one of the most secluded areas in Hollow Knight, while not showing many signs of being infected, contains tramways and an entire village that have been largely abandoned, inhabited only by a few individuals struggling to cling to their lives. The Fungal Wastes is home to the second largest concentration of still sentient civilians, being the Mantis Village, but even the proud tribe that calls the village their home is confined solely to the wastes. The largest settlement, the Hive, is no different, however, as all of the creatures who hail from this large, surprisingly well-maintained structure refuse to stray far from the area immediately surrounding it, that being Kingdom's Edge. This harsh climate is home to no more than Nailmaster Oro and a group of deranged civilians who spend the rest of their lives fighting or being entertained at the Coliseum of Fools, all desensitized to the sight of the structure's proprietor's long-dead corpse sitting among them. Similarly desolate to Kingdom's Edge is King's Pass, a trail resting on the surface which leads to the kingdom. Crystal Peak and the resting grounds are also solemn, largely uninhabited areas, as is the ancient Basin, which, despite its far distance from the origin of the infection, has shown the worst signs of of decay. Few, if any, call this region home, though many once did. The darkness-draped chambers, resting at the deepest depths of Hallownest, while now inhabited only by beings of pure darkness, once housed the White Palace, which itself served as a home for the King of Hallownest and many of his people. The once bright halls of the palace can be explored through the manipulating of dreams, but in the present, the structure rests unrecognizable with a single husk of armor sitting at its entrance. The ability to witness what the White Palace once was granted a perspective not previously accessible. By knowing what a part of Hallownest once looked like, players are left to sketch imaginary images of how other regions of the kingdom might have once appeared before they fell into decay. Perhaps the infected crossroads once served as a bustling route which civilians crossed through in order to reach the other parts of Hallownest. Dirtmouth may very well have been a hospitable welcome to visitors, starkly contrasting the village's now bleak appearance. And the City of Tears, nestled at the heart of Hallownest, undoubtedly served as a crowded yet magnificent place for the population of the kingdom. But that time has passed, and players are given only the option to imagine what it might have been like. Instead, they're presented with a world full of minuscule bugs who, if not deceased or infected, hide lost and without aim in the vast hellscape that they once called their kingdom. Not only does witnessing the state of Hallownest cast a depressing and hard-to-ignore atmosphere on Hollow Knight, but so too does meeting the kingdom's residents, desperate to find meanings to their lives. Elderbug, the first character the knight meets, became the owner of a neglectful, dismissive personality when the infection struck, refusing to positively acknowledge anything save for the bland scenery of Dirtmouth. The Fluke Hermit, once backed into a remote room near the junk pit, tries desperately to raise her struggling adopted kin, and Lem, a resident of the City of Tears, spends the rest of his days studying ancient artifacts found throughout Hallownest. Perhaps the most eye-opening of these characters is the Nailsmith, who upgrades the knight's blade, largely ignorant to the state of the world around him. Upon forging the nail to the best of his abilities, with no purpose left in his life, the Nailsmith asks the knight to strike him down with the fruit of his labor. Witnessing Hallownest's devastated scenery and the state of its few remaining civilians now living in seclusion and likely unaware that other survivors are suffering similar fates, left a strong impression that will not fade anytime soon, but again, there's more to Hollow Knight's atmosphere than meets the eye. While gameplay may seem entirely separate from atmosphere, Hollow Knight's developers made a few choices that actually linked these two properties. The game's atmosphere is best described as haunting, lonesome, and most importantly in the case of gameplay, tense. The game is a Metroidvania, and so with this knowledge, one of the first things players may notice is that they initially lack a map, and even when they obtain one, they can't yet see the location of the knight on it. Once the compass is found, players can see their character in relation to the world around them, but only if they have the map for the area they're currently exploring, as each individual location requires a distinct map. This means that for a considerable amount of time, players are forced to aimlessly stumble through Hallownest's dark caverns, unaware of what will confront them ahead. This is frightening enough, but the fact that if one were to die while exploring uncharted territory, their accumulated geo would fall on difficult to relocate ground, makes mapping out Hallownest a constantly worrying task that only greatens the influence of the kingdom and its civilians' desolate appearances. Hollow Knight only minimally negates the stress of exploring its world by implementing scarcely placed benches which serve as resting points. Though appearing deceivingly unimportant, these benches provide relief that is found almost nowhere else in the kingdom of Hallownest, and their importance displays just how cruel and frighteningly unfamiliar the atmosphere of Hollow Knight can be. Lastly, it's known that any good video game soundtrack should be able to grate in the tone that its respective title is aiming to convey, and Christopher Larkin undoubtedly accomplishes this by perfectly complementing the game's gloomy atmosphere with his compositions, whether subtly with tracks like Fungal Wastes, or dramatically with compositions such as Sealed Vessel. Even the rendition of Dirtmouth, which is played by Nim on a bug-like accordion, is described both by Nim himself and Elderbug as being rather somber, despite the track being the closest to having an upbeat nature out of the game's entire OST. Visually witnessing the world of Hallownest was naturally a saddening experience, but having to struggle to chart its many pathways while listening to the kingdom's haunted compositions served to cement Hollow Knight's sinister atmosphere as one of the most unforgettable I've ever witnessed in a video game. Hollow Knight is part of the very small handful out of the plethora of indie games that have far exceeded the levels of success expected of them. Being a crowd-funded title competing against many AAA games, Hollow Knight, as many indie games have, released with odds stacked against its success, and so, for it to achieve the acclaim that it has, the game had to have made a grand identity for itself. Many factors contributed to Hollow Knight's success, such as the game's swift, precision-based combat and customizable playstyles. And while different aspects of the game likely suck better or worse for different individuals, the lingering feeling of desperation that Hallownest's atmosphere cast upon me is what will stick with me the most. Witnessing characters fail to combat the infection, falling victim to age, insanity, depression, and many other horrors, wandering past the rejected, crumbling architecture of Hallownest, swaying on the edge of my seat as I desperately searched for the nearest bench in unfamiliar lands, all while listening, whether consciously or not, to the compositions that echoed through the lost kingdom of Hollow Knight, is what made this title stand out among an ever-growing, boundless sea of video games, and is what finally convinced me to play past the first hour after giving up on Hollow Knight 5 times prior. Thank you all so much for watching. But one last thing. As someone who's owned the game since 2017 and only recently completed it, I must say it was awfully kind of Team Cherry to hold off on revealing more about Hollow Knight Silksong until I beat the first game. Alright Team Cherry, I'm ready when you are.